So here's the hangman component that asks the player for a single letter and validates that it is a single letter, and also that it's not a letter that they previously guessed, so that you can keep an accurate count of how many guesses they made and only hang the man if they made the wrong number, the maximum number of guesses. I regret giving this one as the first component because it is the most complicated. It has the most sophisticated logic. It has a bunch of concepts in it. It's the hardest to follow. And I'm not surprised that it was difficult to accomplish. The other ones were a lot easier, and I'm afraid a lot of you didn't spend enough time on them because you were working on this one for so long. But I'm going to show you how to build it, or at least one way to build it. Again, like a lot of these, there's several ways to do it, but I'm going to do it the simplest way I can think of and build it up so that hopefully it all makes sense. So the goal of this test script is that it simply asks for a single letter. There's a little list here that's just a representative list of the previous guesses. We're not going to manage the previous guesses. That's for a different part of your game. This is just for testing, so that if they previously, you can simulate. If they previously guessed E, then you would put E in there. But we'll start off not dealing with previous guesses, and we'll add that in later. So all the code needs to go into the custom block. The rest of this program is just for testing. And the custom block starts off pretty simply. It asks for enter a guess. And then it would respond back out, report back out the answer. And that's a good start, right? Enter a guess, and you enter anything, and you hit enter, and it reports it back out. But we want to validate that it is a single letter. It is a letter, not a number or a symbol, and it's not in the previous guesses. And we're going to continually ask until we get an answer. This is a really, actually, I think a very cool thing about Snap. Like, there are a lot of weird things with it, but I think this is a great one, that you're actually pausing execution here on this block. If there was a lot more code under here, it would stop at this until they insert a valid guess, and not go on, so that it's very clear that you're just kind of stuck here at this custom block. So let's simulate just repeatedly asking for a guess. I like repeat until for this because the logic is we're going to repeat until it's valid. And we can just keep asking. Enter a guess. A valid guess, please. Let's just put some dummy text in here. And we'll say enter a guess, enter a valid guess, please enter a valid guess, please enter a valid guess. It's going to keep going. It's never going to stop executing. This repeat is stuck here, and we're not getting to report because we're repeating until nothing, which is basically false. If we had true there, if we had repeat until true, or maybe for clarity, let's go ahead and make our variable, let's set it to true. And then repeat until valid guess. The guess is already valid at this point. So the repeat never happened. So what we want to do is actually start at false. Then set valid guess to true as soon as we've validated every single step. And until we have, we will continually repeat. So let's pick one first thing to check against. Let's make sure it's not too long. And we can go ahead and make sure it's not too short as well. If the length of the guess is 1, then it's possibly valid. If it's not If it's 0 or it's greater than 1, then it's not valid. And we're going to ask again. So let's do equals 0 and greater than 1. Those are the two length ones. So if the length of the answer is 0 or the length of the answer is greater than 1, then we know it's not valid. And we're going to ask again, and then we're going to trigger the repeat by not having any of the rest of the code execute. So we know length of from previous components. And we're using the answer variable, the special answer variable for both of these. So if length of answer is 0 or length of answer is greater than 1, let's ask again and be specific. This is where you're making it very useful and clear to the user. Please enter a single letter. And wait, and as soon as it's waited, it will actually do nothing else because we're just in this if, and the only thing in the if part here is the ask. And so this if block will end, and we'll repeat back up. Valid guess will still be false, and we'll continually repeat. So let's enter a guess, and let's guess A. It says, please enter a single letter. And then, so now we're here. And as soon as we enter nothing, we come back up, repeat until valid guess. We do this first length check again. We ask again. If it is a single letter, then we hit this else block and we stopped. Actually, that's not true. We hit this, we didn't stop, we actually repeated back here again, and we're now continually repeating because there's no condition, we're just repeating and repeating and repeating. So let's stop the script from repeating right now, and let's go to the next part. So now we want to make sure, now that we know that it's a single letter, let's make sure that it's a letter at all. And we've done this a couple ways. We've used to see if it is a number. So if something is a number, but as it was pointed out to me pretty early, that doesn't help with symbols. You could put a $sign in, and that would not be a number, but it wouldn't be a letter either. And so a lot of you decided that you wanted to use a whitelist, and I think that's a great idea. That's my favorite idea of all of these. And a whitelist is a list that contains things that are valid. And so you can do a quick check. Is the answer valid by seeing if it's in the list? Or really, we're going to do, is the answer not valid because it's not in the list? So how do we create a whitelist? Well, there's two ways. There's set alphabet to A, B, C, like create a long list where you're creating each one. I think that's totally acceptable. I'm going to take a quick shortcut though, and actually do it this way. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. I'm going to create some text that has every letter. And what we could do is use your other component, letter is in word, and treating this as a word, this alphabet as a word, and using that. And if you remember, the second way of doing that is to take the word and splitting it into a list of letters. And we did that with the split. So if we split alphabet by letter, we now have a list with every letter. And we can make sure that that works if we want to go ahead and say it here for 2 seconds. Say alphabet for 2 seconds. So, seems like it's in a random order. Let's actually get rid of this part for a moment. Say it for longer. Oh, it says hello world. Oh, that's because we split hello world instead of alphabet. That's silly. Let's split alphabet by letter. Now we have 26 items in the list, and they are A through Z. So now we have our whitelist. That, to me, was just easier than typing A, B, C and just individual cells. Not by much, but enough that it was worth doing. So now we have our whitelist called alphabet, and we want to do a check. We're assuming that the guess is invalid, that valid is false, and so we want to confirm that it's false and ask again if it is. So let's just kind of repeat this and do, if it's not valid, if it's not in the whitelist, ask again. If it is, we'll do something else. How do we know that it's valid, that it is actually a letter? Well, similar to is letter and word, we can use the contains. We have our alphabet, our whitelist, and we have the answer, which is the thing. So if alphabet contains the answer, then we know it's true. But again, we only care right now if it's false, because we're trying to see what we should be asking again. So if it's not in the list, let's ask again. So enter a guess. Hash sign. That's not a letter. Dollar sign. That's not a letter. Period. That's not a letter. A. Please enter a single letter. A. All right, we're not asking again. Neither of these conditions failed. We got a single letter because we know the length is not 0 or greater than 1. And we know that it is a letter because it's inside our whitelist. So we reached this, and we're continually hitting this else, which does nothing, and then we're repeating. And so this is, again, stuck in a loop. It's not going to be done for a while. The final check is if it's in the previous guesses list. If it is in the previous guesses, we want to give them a message saying, you've already guessed that, and ask again. It'll stay invalid. The repeat until valid will still repeat, and we won't be able to leave this block until the next guess. So this is very similar to the previous one. We have another if-else. This gets kind of nasty because it's all nested in here. But instead of alphabet containing answer, we want to see if previous guesses contains answer. But instead of not containing the answer, we want to check if it does contain the answer. So it's actually slightly simpler. So previous guesses contains the answer. We want to ask again and ask a clarifying question, being telling them, you already guessed that. So by default, we won't be able to get to that because our input list has nothing in it. So we're in the same state we were. But if we added A to our list and we entered A, it tells us we already guessed that. And our previous checks will still work. And our symbol check will still work. And if we ask for something else, we get stuck in our infinite loop. So why is our loop infinite? Well, we're passing this one, skipping this ask. We're passing this one, skipping this ask. Passing this one, skipping this ask. Getting to else. And nothing's happening. Nothing's changing. So valid guess is still false. So what do we need to do to be able to stop repeating? Well, we need to set valid guess to true. Once we've made all of these other checks, we now know it is a valid guess. We can change the value of valid guess, and repeat will no longer repeat because valid guess is true. Repeat until true. Enter a guess A. You already guessed that. Enter a guess ABD. Not too long. Enter a guess nothing. Not long enough. Enter a symbol. That's not a letter. Let's guess G. And it worked. We stopped repeating, we said the letter. We could now assign that letter to a variable that we could then use to add to our list, display the placeholders, including this one, and move on to the next guess. And we can repeatedly use this ask for a single letter excluding throughout our game. A point of confusion, this seemed very, very common, is that previous guesses list, which is an input variable, it's right here. People thought they needed to add the previous guesses to this. But in this simple test script, we're managing it manually by having a specific list that we create each time we run the test. And in fact, what you would probably do is have a global variable called previous guesses. And it would be a list that when the game started would be empty. And instead of saying the guess, we would probably take that guess and store it into another variable. Maybe even call that guess current guess. Now we can use our previous guesses array. So again, we could manually manage this by using this manually created list right here. But I'm going to just demonstrate quickly what would happen in the actual game. Is that you would get current guesses, and then you would add the current guess to the previous guesses. And that's where you would manage the previous guesses. And if you had this in a repeat loop, if you repeated, for instance, say you gave them five attempts, you'd start with an empty list for previous guesses as a global variable. You'd maybe repeat 5 times. Every time you get a single letter that's valid, you would store that in a variable and then add the value of that variable to current guesses. So that's all really to the point where this is a very complex custom block. It's one of our longest that we've written, I believe. It has a whitelist, a bunch of variables to store the state of whether it's valid or not. It has several different ask blocks to make sure that the user knows what went wrong in their last guess. It has 3 different checks that are all very different. And it finally reports the answer when everything passes. It's a lot. So why would you want to bother managing the list of guesses here? It just makes this more complicated. Instead, this block has a simpler responsibility, the simplest we can at this point, and the management will happen elsewhere. So when this works, we can say enter a guess. We guess A. And now A became current guess, and that was added to previous guesses. And then we can guess B. Now our list of guesses has 2 items in it. And if we guess A again, previous guesses being passed into it. So the previous guesses in the block then has the same value as the previous guesses that's globally. They're named the same, but they don't have to be. In fact, if we call this just exist other letters, and then we fix our reference at the bottom to be other letters instead of previous guesses, that might have made things a little clearer. Stop again. So if we entered a guess A and entered A again, other letters now inside the block contains the previous guesses. V, we can put in a symbol, we can put in too many things, put in not enough things. But every time we're going through this thing here where we're validating the guess, we're actually stuck right here. We don't continue on in our game until afterwards. So that's the validation block. It is hard. I totally understand why it took some people a long time to get, and hopefully it all makes sense at this point.